Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Have you ever picked someone up, not out of duty, not because it was expected, but simply because you knew they would fall if you didn't? Sometimes the smallest gesture, one no one asked for, can become the moment that redefines everything. This story isn't about grand decisions or perfect timing. It's about a waitress, a little boy who doesn't like to be touched, and a split-second choice that no policy could predict. But every heart understands. If you believe there are moments in life when the only right thing to do is to reach out, then like this video, subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, and stay with us until the very end. Because today's story will challenge what you think you know about boundaries, permission, and what it means to be held just in time. The clatter of silverware and low hum of conversation echoed across the upscale Italian restaurant, where white linen covered every table and candlelight danced off the marble-tiled floor. Businessmen clinked glasses over veal parmesan. Couples leaned close, whispering softly. It was the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever happened, until that night. At a quiet table in the corner, Edward Callahan sat like a marble statue, dressed immaculately in a dark tailored suit. His posture was precise, his napkin folded crisply in his lap. He rarely needed to speak, his presence alone kept things in line. Across from him sat his 5-year-old son, Noah, small, delicate, with wisps of blonde hair curling at his ears. The boy was dressed neatly, but the gentle tremor in his limbs betrayed his condition. Cerebral palsy had left him with weak motor control and a deep fear of sudden touch. He rarely made eye contact, rarely spoke. But he liked this restaurant. Maybe it was the way the light filtered through the stained glass windows, or maybe it was just familiar. Lena Hartley, a waitress in her late 20s, moved between tables with practiced grace. Her uniform was simple: black slacks, white shirt, dark apron tied tightly at her waist. But what stood out most wasn't her appearance, it was her attentiveness. Every motion was deliberate, quiet, and careful, the kind of careful that comes from experience, not training. She had only been working here a few weeks. Most of the staff still didn't know that she had spent 6 years caring for an older brother in the final stages of spastic quadriplegia. She had learned to read body language when there were no words. She had learned when to move and when to wait. As she passed by the Callahan table, Lena glanced down just in time to see Noah's small hand reaching for the edge of the table, trying to steady himself as he slid forward on his seat. He wanted to stand. He was trying. But the floor beneath him was slick marble. At that same moment, a man in a gray suit briskly moved behind the boy, unaware. His foot clipped the chair leg. It all happened in a blink. Noah's balance gave way, his legs crumpled beneath him, and his small frame lurched backward with a sharp thud. His arms flailed. His eyes widened in silent terror. There was no scream, just the sudden silence that follows a child's fall when breath is stolen before sound. For one long heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lena dropped her tray. She didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, she was on her knees, arms scooping Noah from the cold stone floor as if she'd done it 100 times. She cradled him against her chest like an infant, one hand steady at the base of his neck, the other around his fragile ribcage. Noah didn't cry. He didn't fight. He just curled into her, small hands grabbing weakly at the fabric of her shirt, his head burrowing under her chin as if he belonged there. "It's okay," she whispered again and again, her voice low, steady, barely audible. "You're safe now. I've got you." The restaurant froze. A waiter dropped a spoon. Someone gasped. A couple near the bar turned in their seats. And standing just beyond the column, only a few feet away, Edward Callahan watched it all, his face pale, frozen mid-step, eyes locked onto the woman holding his son. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Edward had spent years constructing the image of a flawless family. Perfect posture. Perfect manners. Therapists, aides, private specialists, each of them trained, scheduled, and coordinated to avoid moments exactly like this. And now a waitress, one he didn't recognize, was holding his son in the middle of a crowded dining room. Holding him. Not with caution. Not with ceremony. But with instinct. With feeling. Edward's throat tightened. He was supposed to be the one who protected Noah. Who made the right calls, hired the right experts. But in that moment, all he had done was stand still. While she moved. Lena didn't look up. Not yet. She was too busy adjusting Noah's position so his neck wouldn't strain. Too busy shielding his body from the curious stares now creeping in from every direction. It was only after Noah let out a breath, soft, shaky but calm, that Lena raised her eyes. Their gaze met. Edward's mouth opened, but no words came. Lena didn't apologize. She didn't offer an explanation. She simply held the child closer, gently resting his head against her shoulder, and waited for the world to catch up. Lena could feel the weight of him, light but trembling, against her chest. Noah's small body didn't stiffen or resist. Instead, his arms, fragile as willow branches, lifted with a slow caution of someone who had never been taught trust, but still hoped it existed. He reached up and placed one hand around the back of her neck. The other flopped weakly around her shoulder, his fingers brushing her collar. It was clumsy, incomplete, but it was a hug. His first. Lena didn't move. She didn't speak again. She simply held him, one hand supporting the back of his head, the other pressed gently along his spine, keeping him steady. Her breath came slow and even, matching the boy's shallow exhales, as if syncing with him might make him feel more solid. The restaurant had gone nearly silent, save for the clink of a wine glass in the distance and the creak of someone adjusting in their chair. It wasn't just shock. It was discomfort. The kind that settles in a place where the rules no longer feel clear. A man at a nearby table leaned toward his wife and whispered under his breath, "That's Callahan's kid. She's touching him. Isn't that against something?" His wife glanced over with pursed lips. "It's not her place. She's just a waitress." The word echoed, just a waitress. At the bar, a manager in a navy vest hesitated, eyes darting between Lena and the entrance to the VIP wing. He was calculating. How much trouble? Who's watching? Does Callahan sue? But he didn't move. No one did. Noah, meanwhile, nestled his head deeper into Lena's shoulder, releasing a soft, shaky sigh. It was almost imperceptible, but Lena felt it. A letting go. A small body, always on edge, finally giving in to the notion of safety. And still, she didn't put him down. Her knees hurt from the marble floor. Her apron had caught the corner of a fallen fork. Her tray lay shattered somewhere behind her, but her hands never wavered. Then came the voice, low, sharp, cutting through the quiet like the edge of a blade. "Someone stop her. You don't just grab that boy." Lena turned her head toward the voice. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. Her eyes scanned the room, not defiantly but firmly, as if daring anyone to tell her that what she was doing wasn't right. And still, she held him. Her cheek brushed against the top of Noah's head, her breath warming his scalp. She adjusted her grip slightly, cupping the base of his skull with one hand so his head could rest more easily against her collarbone. Noah's fingers twitched, then curled into the fabric of her shirt. It was his decision now, not hers. The people watching didn't understand. They saw a woman out of place. They saw broken protocol. They saw a powerful man's son in the arms of someone who wasn't approved. But Lena didn't see rules or optics or headlines. She saw a child who didn't scream when he fell. She saw a child who reached out, for the first time. And she knew, if she put him down now, that gesture might never come again. A boy like Noah didn't give away his trust. Not because he was shy or defiant, but because every day, his body betrayed him. He had learned to expect detachment. Gloves. Clipboards. Measured tones and practiced hands. He knew how to brace for every lift, every shift, every fake smile. But this? This was different. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he hadn't recoiled. Across the room, someone reached for their phone, half raising it before thinking better and slipping it back into their jacket. The moment wasn't viral. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just quiet and painfully real. From behind a column, Edward Callahan continued to watch. His jaw was clenched, his hands stiff at his sides. He could feel the attention turning toward him now, eyes flicking to his reaction, waiting for him to reclaim control of the scene. To say something. To step in. But for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. Lena finally looked directly at him. Her face was calm. Not pleading. Not challenging. She didn't ask for permission. She simply adjusted Noah again, resting his weight a little higher on her chest so his breathing wouldn't strain. One hand still cradled the back of his neck, fingers threaded lightly into his hair. Her thumb made small circles against his shoulder blade. Noah didn't move. And Edward, he didn't either. The silence that followed was not peace. It was pressure, tense, unspoken, and sharp-edged. Edward Callahan finally stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes tapping against the marble like a judge's gavel. His face was set, lips pressed into a line, but his eyes gave him away. There was something wild behind them. Not anger. Not yet. But the tremble of a man who had lost control of something he thought was his to govern. Noah was still in the waitress's arms. Edward stopped a few feet from Lena, keeping his distance as if proximity might somehow unravel the thread of composure he was clinging to. "You shouldn't be holding him like that," he said, voice low but taut. "He has a therapy protocol. It's very specific. Sudden lifting is distressing." His tone wasn't cruel. It was clinical, sharp and practiced, the way someone speaks when they've memorized every term from a treatment plan but missed the humanity behind it. Lena didn't flinch. She glanced down at Noah. His face was calm now, resting soft against her shoulder. One of his hands was still looped behind her neck, fingers twitching faintly, but he wasn't pulling away. "I understand that," she said gently. "But I think, right now, he's choosing safety over protocol." Edward's jaw tightened. "That's not your call," he snapped, his voice rising barely above a whisper but heavy with authority. "You don't know him." Lena met his gaze. "No," she replied. "But I think he knows me." That stopped Edward for a beat. He blinked once, hard. Around them, the restaurant had begun to stir again, but quietly, as if the patrons understood this wasn't their scene to interfere in. A few heads turned discreetly. A waiter stepped away from the table he had been serving, unsure if he should intervene. Lena remained on her knees, Noah still cradled in her arms. She hadn't moved since the fall. Her grip hadn't changed. But something in her posture was unshakable, like she'd been here before, not in this room, but in this exact moment. Edward looked at his son. Noah wasn't trembling. Wasn't crying. Wasn't frozen in panic the way he usually was when things veered from schedule. He was breathing. Even. Steady. "I've spent years trying to teach him not to panic," Edward muttered, mostly to himself. "And maybe," Lena said softly, "he just needed someone who didn't." Her voice wasn't combative. It was simply true. The kind of truth that doesn't raise its tone because it doesn't need to. Edward took a breath, long and slow, through his nose. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his hands. But something behind his eyes turned cold. "You'll be reassigned," he said. "Immediately. I don't want you serving this section again." Lena blinked. She looked down at Noah, then back at Edward. Understood. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't defiance either. It was acknowledgement, a line drawn between what she knew was right and what the system would tolerate. Edward nodded once. It was more habit than conviction. He turned to leave, then hesitated. "Put him down gently," he added. "He doesn't like transitions." Lena didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, she adjusted her hold, slow and smooth, and began to lower Noah back into his chair like she was placing something sacred into a cradle. Her hands never rushed. Her expression never cracked. Noah didn't resist. His fingers lingered on her arm for a moment after he was seated, then slipped away. Edward watched that detail, the lingering touch, and looked like he'd been hit somewhere just beneath the surface. But he said nothing more. He turned and walked away, stiff and upright, like a man clinging to the last rules he had left. Behind him, Lena stood slowly, brushing the dust from her knees. She didn't look at the other guests. She didn't search for validation. She just returned to the service station, picked up a clean towel, and wiped her hands. 3 days later, the air inside the Callahan estate felt heavier than usual, thicker somehow, despite the spotless windows and circulating air purifiers humming softly in every room. Edward stood at the threshold of his son's therapy room, arms crossed, jaw tight. The space was designed with precision. Cushioned floors, soft ambient light, a sensory corner built to the exact specifications of Noah's treatment team. Everything was clean, ordered, safe. Except for Noah. The little boy sat curled in the far corner of the room, his knees pulled tight against his chest, arms wrapped around himself in a small self-imposed cage. His blond head drooped low, nearly resting against his knees. He hadn't spoken all morning. Not to the nurse. Not to the occupational therapist. Not even to the speech pathologist who brought his favorite picture cards. Edward watched, unmoving. Dr. Hale, one of the lead pediatric specialists, knelt nearby with a soft, coaxing voice. "Noah, can we try standing today? Just a few seconds. I'll be right here. Nothing sudden. I promise." No response. The therapist reached slowly for one of the foam balance bars. "Remember the pirate game we played last week? You were so brave." Noah didn't move. His arms tightened slightly around his ribs, his small shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly. Edward finally stepped in, kneeling next to Dr. Hale. "What's going on?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Dr. Hale glanced at him, concern etched deeply into his brow. "He hasn't stood in 72 hours. He won't engage with any stimuli. We've ruled out physical pain, fever, muscle spasms." "Then what is it?" "I don't know," Hale admitted. "Sometimes it's emotional regression. Trauma. Maybe a sensory overload. Or maybe something was taken away." Edward looked at his son, really looked this time. Noah was not panicked. Not throwing a tantrum. Not in distress. But there was a hollowness in him now. A blankness behind his blue eyes. As if he had already decided there was no point in trying. A whiteboard sat nearby with a dry erase marker clipped to its side. Noah hadn't touched it in days. But now, without warning, the boy slowly unwrapped one arm from his chest and reached, trembling fingers stretching toward the board. Both men watched in silence as Noah dragged the marker across the surface. The letters were shaky, uneven, just barely legible. No scoop. No arms. Edward felt something shift in his chest. The words didn't make sense at first. Not in a clinical way. They weren't part of a therapy script. They weren't words from a progress report. They were raw. Unfiltered. He stepped forward, staring at the message as if it might rearrange itself into something more logical if he just looked long enough. No scoop. No arms. Edward's throat tightened. The phrase echoed in his mind, tapping at something deeper than his intellect, somewhere he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. He thought of that moment in the restaurant, frozen just outside the circle of connection. The way the waitress had moved without waiting. The way Noah had curled into her with a kind of peace he'd never shown before. And now, without her, his son was folding in on himself again. The difference was stark. And unbearable. Dr. Hale cleared his throat gently. "Does that mean anything to you?" Edward didn't answer right away. He stared at the board, then back at his son, who now sat with a marker in his lap, unmoving again. The message had been sent. That was all Noah could give. "I think," Edward began, his voice quieter than before, "he's asking for something no therapy plan can offer." The doctor tilted his head. "Which is?" Edward swallowed hard. "Presence," he said. "And maybe being held. Not for treatment. Just because he needs it." The room was quiet again. Edward knelt down beside his son, not reaching out, just lowering himself to Noah's level. He didn't touch him. Didn't try to speak. Just sat with him, close enough to feel the boy's shallow breathing, far enough to respect the boundary he now regretted drawing so tightly for so many years. And for the first time in days, Noah didn't flinch. Edward sat alone in the back office of the restaurant, the lights dimmed low, the only glow coming from the monitor on the desk in front of him. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the security system and the occasional pop from the heating ducts. His jacket was draped over the back of a nearby chair, tie loosened, top button undone, a rare sight for a man who usually dressed like he was always being watched. But tonight, he was watching. He clicked the mouse slowly, dragging the timeline back to that exact moment, the one he couldn't stop replaying in his head. The footage was in black and white, grainy around the edges, but clear enough. Table 7. The child. The foal. The waitress. He pressed play. There was no sound, only the silent rhythm of movement. He watched Noah reach for the table. The man passing too close. The stumble. The foal. Then, Lena. She dropped to her knees like instinct had kicked down the door inside her. Her arms moved with practiced care, gathering Noah up before his back could even fully hit the floor. The moment was so fast, so seamless, it looked choreographed. Edward slowed the footage. Frame by frame he followed her motion. The cradle, the press to her chest, the way she cupped his head so naturally it seemed like she had done it 1,000 times. But it was the next moment that made his breath catch. He zoomed in. Noah's hand, small, pale, fingers spread, reached up. It wasn't reflexive. It wasn't spastic. It was deliberate. He watched as the boy's hand landed softly on the fabric of Lena's shirt, then curled, grasping the cotton with a kind of quiet desperation. He held on. Not out of fear. Not because he was falling again. But because he didn't want to be let go. Edward leaned back slightly in the chair, eyes fixed on that frozen frame. He'd never seen Noah initiate contact before. Never like that. There had always been hesitation, resistance, tension. But here, with someone he'd known for less than an hour, the boy had reached out. Not for help. For comfort. There was a knock on the doorframe. Edward turned his head to see Mason, the floor manager, standing there with his hands in his pockets. The young man looked nervous, unsure if he should have interrupted. I didn't mean to bother you, sir," Mason said quietly. "I just came to check if you needed anything." Edward shook his head. "No. Just reviewing something." Mason stepped in slowly, glancing at the paused frame on the screen. His eyes softened. "That's from the other night, isn't it?" Edward didn't respond. Mason looked again, then said, almost to himself, but loud enough to cut through the stillness. "Kid knew who'd catch him." Edward looked up. Mason shrugged, then added, "You can train a dozen therapists to follow protocol, but trust? That's something people decide on their own." He picked her. First one he's ever reached for like that. Edward stared at the screen again, this time not at Lena, not even at Noah, but at the space between them. The safety that had bloomed there, unscripted. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low, nearly a whisper. "I thought keeping him safe meant controlling everything," he said. "Every step. Every voice. Every room." "And maybe it did," Mason offered carefully, "until it didn't." The words sank in slowly, like rain finding cracks in a foundation. Edward looked back at the screen one last time before closing the laptop lid gently, as though waking someone. He sat in silence for a moment longer, hands clasped together, elbows resting on the edge of the desk. Outside, the kitchen staff was winding down for the night. Lights dimmed. Chairs lifted onto tables. But inside this room, something else had begun to shift, something Edward hadn't planned for, couldn't measure. And it all started with a boy who reached out. And someone who never let go. The air inside the assisted living center smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. Soft music drifted from a nearby lounge where two elderly residents played checkers in near silence. Lena moved down the hallway, a basket of folded linens cradled in one arm, her steps quiet, measured. Volunteering here was how she ended her long shifts. No orders, no pressure, just presence. She had just turned the corner when she saw him. Edward Callahan stood at the far end of the corridor, uncharacteristically out of place. No chauffeur. No entourage. Just him, holding a small folded napkin in his hand like it weighed more than it should. Their eyes met. Lena paused. She didn't stiffen or flinch, but she did stop walking. She shifted the basket to one hip and waited. The fluorescent lighting cast long shadows across the floor, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Edward walked forward, not hurriedly, but deliberately, like someone who had rehearsed this moment in his head and still wasn't sure how it would land. When he stopped in front of her, he held the napkin out, not with a grand gesture, not with trembling guilt, just with quiet resolve. "I found this," he said, "in Noah's room." He drew it the night after that day. Lena set the basket down gently and took the napkin from him. It had a blot of blue ink in the middle, clearly the result of a marker pressed too long in one spot. But within it, a shape had formed, a round circle, and inside it, two arms, small unsteady lines wrapped around something unseen. Above it, in crooked letters barely legible, were three words. "Scoop me again?" Lena stared at the drawing for a long time. Her thumb brushed the edge of the fabric, then she looked up, eyes soft but steady. "It's not a question for me," she said quietly. Edward's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I think," she said slowly, "he's asking you." The hallway felt suddenly smaller, as if her words had drawn invisible walls around them. Edward didn't respond immediately. He looked down at the floor, then back at the napkin in her hand. "I didn't come to apologize," he said, voice low. "Not because I don't feel regret. I do. But I realized something. You didn't need me to say sorry. And Noah doesn't either." Lena nodded once, saying nothing. "I came because I don't know what to do next," he continued. "And for the first time in a very long time, I'm willing to admit that." The hum of the overhead lights filled the silence between them. From down the hall, a nurse laughed softly at something an old man had said. But in this moment, Lena and Edward existed in a different rhythm. She held the napkin against her chest, as if shielding it from the air. "You don't need a plan," she said after a pause. "You just need to be there when he reaches out again." Edward swallowed hard. "What if I miss it?" "Then try again," Lena replied. "And again. Until he doesn't have to ask." He nodded, slowly. Then, like something unspoken passed between them, Lena reached into her apron and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I drew this the night after too," she said, handing it to him. It was a simple sketch. Noah in a pair of oversized boots, standing on what looked like a stack of books. His arms were raised awkwardly, reaching towards someone off-frame. The caption below read, "He's not trying to be taller. He just wants to be caught." Edward's breath hitched. He folded the paper carefully, not with the precision of a businessman, but like a father handling something sacred. Lena picked up her basket again. "I'll be here Thursday," she said, nodding toward the community room. "The kids from the youth center come in the afternoon. It's noisy, but honest." Edward glanced at the napkin again. "Maybe we'll come by." "You should," she said. "Not for me. For him." And then she was gone, down the hallway, past the wheelchairs and faded bulletin boards, back into her quiet rhythm. Edward stayed a moment longer, holding both the napkin and the drawing like anchors. And somewhere deep inside him, something old and rigid began to crack. The banner above the community center stage read, "Arms First, where holding comes before knowing how." It was a modest opening. Folding chairs lined up in imperfect rows, a podium borrowed from a nearby school, and a crowd of about 50 parents, therapists, curious neighbors. Nothing grand. Nothing polished. But that was the point. Edward Callahan stood near the edge of the stage, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, not out of vanity, but to distract his hands from shaking. He'd spoken in boardrooms, addressed shareholders, faced senators and CEOs. But tonight, he was just a father. Lena stood beside him, her presence steady, reassuring. She didn't speak much, but she didn't need to. Her name was now on every brochure, every sign-up form, every wall where training had been replaced by trust. When they first talked about founding Arms First, it wasn't a business pitch. It was a response. To one moment. One reach. One scoop. And tonight, they were honoring that. The audience settled. A light hush fell over the room. At the front, a chair sat empty on stage, small, child-sized. Next to it, a larger armchair, its upholstery worn but clean. It looked nothing like the sleek leather furniture in Edward's estate. That, too, was intentional. Lena stepped up to the microphone. Her voice, though soft, carried across the room. "This isn't a place for instruction," she began. "It's a place for instinct. For those who were told that there's a right way to hold a child. And who later realized, the heart already knows how." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of someone in the back clearing their throat. Lena continued. "We don't teach lifting techniques. We remind people what it means to be a safe place. That's all." She turned and nodded toward the side entrance. Noah emerged from behind the curtain. The room held its breath. He wore a little navy sweater, sleeves slightly too long, and soft khaki pants. His blonde hair was combed neatly, though a single strand refused to stay down. He looked around the room, uncertain, but not afraid. Edward's eyes widened. They hadn't rehearsed this. Noah walked slowly toward the stage. Step by step, pausing once to glance at Lena. She didn't move. Didn't guide. Just watched. And then, in front of everyone, Noah climbed the 3 wooden steps leading to the stage. He paused, turned, and faced the audience. The room fell utterly silent. Noah looked toward the chair, his chair. But then, without speaking, he took a few more steps, and stopped in front of his father. Edward lowered himself to one knee. They stared at each other. Then, wordlessly, Noah reached forward, grabbing onto the fabric of his father's blazer. His legs swung awkwardly as he tried to climb into Edward's lap, not with perfect balance, but with total trust. Edward reacted instinctively, arms sweeping around the boy, guiding him in, holding his weight. And then Noah did something he had never done in public. He settled. No twitching. No tensing. No scanning the room for escape. He simply curled into his father's chest and exhaled, slow and soft, like it was where he'd always meant to be. Edward's mouth trembled. His eyes welled. He looked down at the boy in his arms, arms he'd always kept cautious, controlled, trained by professional boundaries. And now, they simply held. "I won't drop you," he whispered. The microphone picked it up. The audience heard it. Every syllable. And yet, no one moved. Somewhere in the crowd, a mother gripped her husband's hand. A therapist removed her glasses and wiped her eyes. Even the janitor standing in the back lowered his mop and bowed his head. Because they all understood something sacred had just happened. Not a cure. Not a miracle. Just a father, finally carrying his son. Not with strategy. Not with caution. But with love. If you've ever thought that picking someone up was just a reflex, remember this. Some people go their whole lives never being truly held. Not in the moment they fall apart. Not when it mattered most. If you believe that timing of care matters more than technique, like this video, subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, and share this with someone who's learning how to hold on, and how to let themselves be held. And tell us in the comments, when was the last time you were lifted, not physically, but emotionally, right when you needed it most?